Hello there, it's Leslie Bender, and welcome to the Ageless Equestrian. As a rider myself, one of the things that I have found that's so valuable to riding is an amazing instructor, which I've experienced many, many times. And at the end of the day, what's really fascinating about whether you are riding dressage or whether you are doing other types of training, alignment is everything. It truly is. And we as fitness professionals, some of the things that we actually have our clients do is more detrimental to their sport than good. For example, as an equestrian, you're managing over 1,000-pound animal, right? Your whole nervous system is, constantly, feeding off of their nervous system and what you're feeling from them and what they are feeling from you. And with that being said, I find that the more balanced that we are and the more subtle that we feel in our body, the more we're able to connect to our horse. So again, when we look at, lying on our back and doing crunches or doing a lot of flexion exercises and overusing our hip flexors does not translate to being on a horse. So what I want to give you today is some things to think about as a rider. And we want a suppleness in our ankles. And the suppleness in our ankles obviously comes from, how responsive our calves are to movement. So just for example, stand in a neutral position and take a step back with your right foot. Now, if you overly externally rotated, take a look back, and you overly externally rotated your right foot, your calf is tight and so is your hip flexor. So try it on the left side. Once again, without judgment, take a step back. And once again, if there's a lot of external rotation, if my calves are tight, then I'm going to have a hard time dropping my heels, either Western and or English. So take a step back now with that right foot. And this is where I'm going to invite you to have all 10 toes facing forward. Now, as you start to bend into your left knee, you're going to notice that you're going to feel your right calf start to lengthen. The reason I'm holding the bender ball is you want a nice soft ball that's pliable like the bender ball, something that you can actually grip onto. And now start to bend into your left knee. As you do that, your goal right now is to feel a stretch or lengthening in the right calf. And if we were talking about your posterior fascial line, that's what we're really starting to look at. So if you were to reach forward and back just a few times, so technically what's happening here, we're increasing your dorsiflexion in the right heel. So as you move forward and back, for example, as you start to increase that dorsiflexion in the heel, that's going to translate to when I'm sitting in the saddle and having a suppleness. As to where, again, I've seen riders, let's do the other side. I've seen riders ride with their toes down. And when you've got your toes down, you don't have as much control, in my opinion, as a rider, is having a nice suppleness to your heel. So once again, as you bend your right knee and as you reach forward and as you come back, you should start to feel lengthening starting to happen in that calf, all right? Now, let's talk about our hip. So in our hips, all right, thinking about you're sitting in a saddle, you're in a flexed position of the hips, right? And your heels are down. Well, now we want to talk about the hip flexors, which are tight in most people, which lead to, so if my hip flexors are tight, then I'm going to be riding with more of a lordotic curve in my back versus finding neutral in my spine when I'm riding. So it's not tucked, but for me to find neutral as a dressage rider is going to be more challenging if my hip flexors are tight, because they're not going to allow me to find a more neutral position. So take your left foot back again. And all I want you to do is now reach up over your head, not behind you, but above you. And notice what you start to feel as you start to bend again into the right knee. So if my arms are down, I'm not going to affect that whole front line of fascia, but as I bend and I start to reach up over my head, I'm going to start to feel a stretch. Same thing on the other side. As you bend your left knee, you're going to start to feel lengthening in your right side body. And this is just a really simple warm-up that you can do. So think about it, you can hinge forward, lengthen the calf, then you can go right into lengthening the hip. And even if you just do this for a moment before you actually get in the saddle, you're gonna feel something different. Now, why the ball? Well, we're gonna have a lot of series using a large stability ball, foam rolling, et cetera, but this is just a beginning. So I want you to imagine that this ball is an egg. I want you to think of lifting. So if I squeeze hard, like I'm doing right now, it's gonna force me to overuse my hip flexors. I'm gonna go into this lordotic posture and this feels like crap. But if I just barely engage my inner thighs and I feel a sense of lengthening, now let's go into a squat and a lift. In other words, like a posting trot, sit down and come back up. So again, in this position here, I'm gonna send my hips back and I'm gonna come right back up. So I'm not arching and I'm not like thrusting my pelvis forward, but I'm coming back to neutral as I slightly engage my inner thighs as you lift and lower. My goal for you here is that subtleness in the body. But if I squeeze really hard, like if I'm sitting, unless of course your horse shies, then of course you're gonna engage, obviously. But here, if we have this subtleness and you start to lift through your pelvic floor and you breathe through this movement, so as you exhale, right, you start to change the dimension of your pelvic floor. So as you inhale, you're actually compressing the pelvic floor down. And as you exhale, the pelvic floor lifts. Now, better yet, reach your arms up over your head. So the minute I do this without arching my back, I start to feel this lifting sensation. So bringing your arms down and lifting your arms up. So I want you to imagine that if I'm riding right now and I'm kind of doing a posting trot or I'm in kind of in a second position in the saddle, I want you to notice how that is somewhat similar, but not really. Now, of course, if I'm jumping over fences, then I obviously am going to be in this position here, and I need this subtleness here if I'm riding hunters. All right, dressage is different. We are in a more upright position, but this gives you some ideas, and there's going to be more to come of lifting through your core and pelvic floor and breathing. It's essential that we breathe. And when trainers say, pull your abs in, hold in your core, hold everything tight, then you can't breathe. You need to have fluidity and get rid of rigidity. So in other words, if I'm rigid in my body, I don't have any fluidity. And we get this a lot of times, we hear this from trainers all the time, is to tighten, squeeze, tuck, and that doesn't allow us to move, if that makes sense. Once again, this is the Ageless Equestrian. There will be a lot more coming your way, and we'll be bringing in guests who, and they're some of the best trainers in the world, that we'll be able to speak to about how to improve our posture, which ultimately improves our ride. Thank you for joining me.